conservative American message, hosted by the one and only Cam Lau. I had the opportunity to talk to Iowa State Representative Mark Thompson. I guess I wanted to start off with your background. If you wanted to start by telling us about kind of your upbringing in life and your career in the Marines.
I grew up northwest of Eagle Grove on a farm my dad rented, and went off to college. Went to officer candidate school for the Marine Corps, which is essentially boot camp for officers. The last summer, I was in college, and then so I got done with college in 3.5 years. When I got done in December, I got commissioned as second lieutenant. Got my degree, obviously, and then married my current wife, my only wife, all in December. So we didn't have my report date for active duty was not for another 4 months. So we had to find some other form of income. And so we just got in the car and started heading west, ended up in Colorado. I worked for Kelly Girl. She worked for Kelly Girl. I worked for Manpower, which was just part-time employment all over the place. And then in April started active duty with the Marine Corps, which for Marine officers is something called the Basic School, where all officers learn a little bit about everything in the Marine Corps for 6 months. And then I was an infantry guy, so I went to infantry school for 6 weeks, and then reported to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina in November of 1978. And from there on, we went pretty much all over the world. I served aboard ship for 6-month stints in the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic during that time. Marine Corps and the Navy have a force in readiness aboard ship constantly, every day of the year. So I was part of that, and then went to various other duty stations, some with my family, some not, and then retired from the Marine Corps in 1998, and I'd already been assigned to the counterterrorism office in the State Department. So I stayed there as a civilian. They wanted me to stay as a civilian, so I did that for 20 years. And then during that time, 2012, almost 12 years ago now, Benghazi occurred, that horrible night. And I had monitored that all night long, because normally the team that I led at the time in the counterterrorism office responded to terrorist incidents overseas, and we were not called upon. I made note of that several times as we literally watched people get killed on the ground from our screens in Washington. And so I ended up testifying to that effect in May of 2013, that we had failed them, that we had a force ready to go in and help, even though it wouldn't have gotten there in enough time to prevent it. That was up to the people in Europe to respond to, and they weren't allowed to respond either. And so we would have gone in and helped start the investigation, start holding people responsible, just as we had in similar incidents in Kenya in 1998, and in Yemen in 2000. So anyway, I was not viewed as the team player, so to speak, because I testified before Congress as a so-called whistleblower, a term that means very little in practicality. It looks good on paper, but in practicality, it's not much. And I concluded that congressional hearings are where the truth goes to die, and it does. It becomes theater. Theater lasts for a couple of days, and then it's over. But it wasn't over because I was put on a list to get out, to push out and I pushed back and left under my terms, not their terms. So ended up here in Iowa in 2016, and built a house here, and close to about half our grandchildren. So then 2 years ago, I ran for office. So
you had a pretty interesting career for most of your life. What made you decide to run for office a couple years ago?
well, going back to farm metaphors, if you walk by the barn and the barn stinks, it doesn't get any better if you don't do anything. So not all politics stinks, not all of that stinks. I'd like to think myself as a statesman, not a politician. That's what Washington and Lincoln had in mind, and Madison and Jefferson and all those folks. Policy gets changed at the legislative level. Laws get changed at the legislative level. And I'd been in the executive branch my whole life and just taking orders, and now I could have something to do with impacting the formulation of that policy. So, in those laws. So, I couldn't stand by and look my grandchildren in the eye 10 years from now and just say that I just sat on the front porch reading the newspaper when I could have been doing something else. So that's why I'm here.
So what area does your district cover?
All of Hancock, all of Humboldt, and 3/4 of Wright County. Southeast corner of Wright County is another district. So 2 3/4 counties.
Okay. I guess when you first took office in 2022, what were your main priorities to accomplish there?
Human trafficking legislation, which we passed. And we passed in 2023. We passed another bill this year. I'll be drafting another one for 2025. But we upped the penalties considerably if you're found guilty of human trafficking. And we passed a grooming bill this year. And next year, the goal is to get establish the resources necessary to have a task force that is interagency task force of prosecutors, investigators, and victims organizations that can focus on human trafficking.
So I guess when most people think of, Hancock County, Wright County, these areas in Iowa, we don't really think about human trafficking as a big problem. I think people are kind of ignorant to how bad of things have gotten, especially with how the southern border has been left wide open. You want to kind of talk about locally the issues that have been seen around human trafficking?
Well, a local grocery store employee called us in February when we got back from the legislature on a Thursday afternoon and told us about an incident there where the delivery person taking the groceries out to the car opened the back door, and it was overcome by the stench in the back of the car, and then that there were 5 females stuffed in the back of the car. Unfortunately, they did not report that to anybody for 5 hours. And the first person they reported it to was me. And since I'm not law enforcement, other than following the person, I wouldn't have had the authority to do anything else. But the point is, those people drove away and nothing happened. The store manager the next day was fairly unconcerned. And I got a hold of the CEO of the company and said, there's something called Iowa Businesses Against Trafficking, otherwise known as IBAT. And I said, you need to put some teeth into your membership for IBAT. And he did. And he pursued that. And I think they're better trained now. But when we have these opportunities to call something in, we should take every opportunity. Unless you're the individual that calls every time the neighbor dog barks. When people call in and say, I suspect some human trafficking and people are being abused, that's the kind of news that law enforcement is supposed to respond to. So better it be nothing than it be something really tangible and you not do anything about it. So people have to be aware of that. Plus the labor trafficking in Wright County because of the large agribusiness organizations here that either willfully or unwillfully hire folks is significant. When we have both in Clarion and Eagle Grove over 40% English language learning, a lot of those children are very transitory. They come and go. Their parents or their guardians are there. They drag them in, drag them out. They're children, so we should be helping them, nurturing them. But we spend an inordinate amount of time and money on children whose parents are not invested in them being here. So that's an issue too. I mean, the labor trafficking, the victims of that are primarily minorities. And they're primarily minorities because they can be hired for a much cheaper wage, at a horribly cheaper wage. And if they're here illegally, their immigration status is held over their head as a form of blackmail. And they are told, well, if you complain about your conditions, the conditions you're living in, the conditions you're working in, your pay, we'll just kick you to the curb and you don't have a choice. You don't have a voice. Sex trafficking is ubiquitous. It's in every social economic part of our population. There are children and girls and in some cases boys who are from very well-to-do families that just make one bad decision. And then of course the playing field for this, if you will, is cell phone technology and the ability for any 10-year-old to tap into any site they want to virtually. Although we did pass a law about that, about social media and the children having to have their parents' permission to access social media before the age of 18. So it's in every county, it's in every thoroughfare. People start talking about the interstate and the thoroughfares for that, but the biggest thoroughfare initially is the internet.
So you mentioned some pieces of legislation that have been passed to combat this issue, but what are the next steps? I mean, how far can we go to actually pass legislation that will impact the issue?
Well, the one that I hope to put forward this year, I will put forward, whether it's passed is another thing, is dedicating resources to investigate, prosecute the crime. Right now, it's up to local law enforcement. Local law enforcement does not have the personnel and resources. Local law enforcement does not have the type person who can sit down a trafficking victim who has been violated perhaps thousands of times, certainly hundreds of times, and have a discussion with that person and build a trusting relationship with that person. Local law enforcement can't do that. So we have to create a separate organization to do just that. And it's a very complex arrangement. And it's a very unique skill set for either a man or a woman to be able to sit a victim down and have that kind of discussion. Again, most of our law enforcement are kitted out with the vest, the badge, the mace, the gun, the handcuffs. That just intimidates the average victim, and they've been used to being having someone dominant over them, and that environment. So you can't have that kind of atmosphere or a person when you're talking to a victim.
Well, I really appreciate your passion for that issue. And if there's anything else you wanted to talk about, we can go back to it. But I wanted to explore some other issues. I've been really impressed with what Iowa's done in the last 2 years around specifically like education and abortion and just the economy in general. So what accomplishments are you most proud of in some of those other categories in the last couple of years?
Well, we we passed the heartbeat bill. It it was not as good as people wanted. So most of us believe, I don't say most of us, people that I consider close colleagues and friends consider, life at conception. That being said, the heartbeat bill has saved many, 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 many babies up to this point. I get a level of disdain from people who say that's a false sense of accomplishment, because we should just stick to life at conception. And when I have and I said, well, tell me what that looks like. Well, anybody that gets pregnant should go to jail if they have an abortion. I said, well, what about the 14-year-old girl who might have been impregnated by her stepfather or some other horrible situation? You're going to put her in jail? Well, yeah, just like she killed if she shot somebody. I said, well, I don't agree with that. So it's going to be a long time for life at conception to take hold. And like a lot of things, you can go back to the Old Testament and the New Testament. We had the 10 Commandments, and those were the rules to live by. And then this guy Jesus comes along and says that those are the 10 Commandments, but I expect you to go a step beyond. And basically, it was one's conscience to treat another person with dignity, to not willingly hurt somebody, to take care of orphans and widows and all that. That's not a law. That's an attitude. That's something deeper than a law. So not everything we have wrong in our society is going to be fixed by a law, and we certainly need to get back to our worship of God, no matter the denomination. I spoke to a IJAG course, Iowa Jobs for America graduates. I guess it was in Eagle Grove, and this one young man asked me, well, what do you suggest we do it? Because the world just looks like it's falling apart. And I said, get back to God. And I suspect that was the first time that was ever said in that school. And it was the same school I went to as a boy. And the teacher in the back's kind of like, whoa. I said, well, separation of church and state is a myth. It's a lie. The First Amendment says that we will have no established religion, but we will not interfere in the practicing of any religion. And so and he couldn't argue that. That's black and white Constitution, First Amendment. So we've played this game far too long. We've acquiesced to people who want nothing to do with God, unfortunately. And we pray for those people, but we don't also take a knee either.
Yeah, absolutely. What about like education? What big accomplishments? I know that Iowa's passed a lot of different legislation around both supporting the private and the public school at the same time.
Well, again, I think our school boards need to take a much more active part in what goes on in our schools. School boards are the board of directors, and the superintendent is the chief executive officer. And in most organizations, the chief executive officer takes guidance from the board of directors. I'm not sure that's being done right now. In many cases, maybe in some cases. We passed educational savings accounts. Other people want to call those vouchers, but the educational savings account simply says that the $7,600 that every child in the state gets to go to a school follows the child, doesn't go straight to a public school. So that gets us to the point that like in this district, we have Humboldt has a K through 6 Catholic school. And just outside the district, we have Clear Lake Classical in Clear Lake. And those are the only options other than homeschool. Homeschool is not included in ESA. So children in this district are not apt to take up that ESA option. If you go over to Humboldt and you ask parents over there where their children go after 6th grade, if they go to the Catholic school, and the vast majority stay in Humboldt because the only options they have are Bishop Garrigan in Algona or St. Edmunds in Fort Dodge. So that's a big drive, particularly in January in Iowa. So, but it's a great start for those children, and I visited those schools, and I've been very impressed. But again, it's what's best for the child, not what's best for any other institution that may have a competing impact. Then this year was area education associations. That was ineptly marketed, meaning the first time I heard about it was when the governor mentioned it in her State of the State address. And we spent about 2/3 of our session in Des Moines going back and forth on that. And Area Education Association was designed back in the early 70s to take care of children with special needs. And it grew and grew and grew. And most institutions, as they grow, unless they're closely monitored, become less efficient. And I would say that AEAs were that. They did a lot of good things. They did a lot of educational outreach and expertise that may not have been resident in the school districts, and they provided that. But frankly, the biggest thing that got people's attention on both sides of the debate were that the administrators of the AEAs were making close to $200,000 a year, and in this district, I know there aren't any superintendents that make $200,000 a year, and superintendents have a lot of decisions to make every day that are key to the outcome of the students. And AEAs are basically directing resources towards schools. So the level of responsibility wasn't the same, and I think, and that was addressed in the AEA bill too. So the AEA bill didn't take away special education things from the children. I had parents come up to me in Humboldt with a child who was had a traumatic birth, and he was not the normal 2-year-old in his functions. And I held him for a while, and I could tell that. And his father said, just don't let him take the physical and occupational therapy that child had over the course of his life from the AEA had been tremendous. And just the fact that he was holding his head and trying to communicate with me and moving around was a major accomplishment for this child. So the father said, don't let them take that away. And I specifically asked the question about this child and how his life would change with this bill affect about AEA. And I was assured that it would not affect him. He would still get his help. And I conveyed that to the father. So, there's a lot of half I won't say half truths, but people, the term I've grown to appreciate is confirmational bias. We believe something, therefore we believe everything that we hear that supports that, irrespective of its validity. And we just had another example of that. I got a call from 2 constituents on the same issue, and it was the truancy bill that we passed this past year. And they were getting letters from the school districts that said, you're probably going to have to talk to the county attorney about this because, you're going to be in trouble and the law is going to get involved. Well, it was aimed at people who don't pay attention to where their children are. Their children don't end up in school. They are not getting educated, and there's going to be more of a price to pay for that. If the child has a doctor's appointment, individual education program appointment, band trip, whatever the case is, that's an excused absence. That doesn't apply. So, for the children and parents who are following the rules, there's nothing more coming down on them. However, if you don't read the bill, and that's what I told both of these gentlemen, was please read the bill and see if you still have that opinion. And I haven't heard back from them. So we tend to polarize a lot of things when it comes to children because we don't. It's normally a soft spot in everybody's mind, and but at the same time, the state spends over 50% of its budget on education. And it's like, I can't remember how many billions of dollars the state budget is, but it's over half. I think it's 47% for K through 12. And then the other percentages go to the Regent College at UNI, Iowa, and Iowa State. So it's not like we're not putting money towards this.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the carbon capture pipeline and your take on that.
Well, it's fake science and it's unconstitutional. I boil it down to those two things. People talk about the explosion in Mississippi, where the pipeline blew up and what happened, and that was terrible. And I agree with that danger, but that's an episodic danger. That's a potential danger. The constant danger is to our rights as property owners. The Fifth Amendment says you don't take somebody's land unless it's for a public good, and it has to be adjudicated to that effect in court. There is no public good for this. There's a personal and private gain good. The pipeline is funded by, of all things, the oxymoronic Inflation Reduction Act, which every one of our legislators voted for in Washington, and it doesn't pass that test. Science-wise, 0.04% of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide. That hasn't fluctuated in thousands of years, or I won't say thousands, as long as they've been tracking it and had the science capability of measuring CO2 output. CO2 is required for plant growth. Plants include corn and soybeans. So it's a false premise. It's a canard. We say that ethanol will cease being marketable if we don't have that because of these draconian laws the federal government's tried to put in place about carbon dioxide. And we have the option also of making methanol at the same plants we're making ethanol. And that would be another source of income out of those ethanol plants. But the idiocy of digging a pipeline thousands of miles to North Dakota and then allegedly putting it in the ground forever is comical on its face. So we don't have a carbon dioxide problem. And by the way, the ethanol takes 3 gallons of water out of our aquifers for every gallon of ethanol. And if we were to do the carbon pipeline, if you have a modicum of knowledge of physics, to turn a gas into a liquid, you have to have pressure and temperature drop. Part of that is getting more water. So they're trying to dig more wells inside the ethanol plants to take more water out of our aquifers, which are already lacking. considerably. So um, the only upside to this is the private gain, and that a few people will get easement payments, but those easement payments are forever. So if you say you're going to sell your tract of land for $100,000, that looks like a lot of money. 20 years from now, they could be selling it to a gas station, or they could be selling it to anything they wanted to build on that land because they have easement. So not a good idea.
So I would expect something like that, a green initiative, to come from a bunch of Democrats, but it kind of seems to me that the establishment Republican Party in Iowa is really behind this thing. So why do you think that is?
Money.
Yeah.
A lot of it.
Is there any hope left to defeat the pipeline? I know that the IUB board has approved it now, and it seems like they just keep on keeping on. Is there anything else left to do?
Well, it's going to go to the courts. I advise my colleagues to um, focus on the main thing right now, and that is getting the money together to pay a very effective law firm to fight this in the courts, and it may go to all the way to the Supreme Court. And the IUB, now the IUC, but the IUB basically was making a constitutional decision, and they're not a court. And the constitutional decision was eminent domain. So I went to one or two of their hearings, and at neither one was there a full panel of IUB members, i.e., three of them. Well, no court in the land would allow, and that's an appellate court, no appellate court in the land would allow a hearing to take place in front of the judges if one of them were missing. So the arrogance of the IUB of holding these panels, and I can catch up, or I can watch it on a video sometime. That doesn't pass muster. So the Kelo decision in the early 2000s was in Connecticut, and that court case went to the Supreme Court, and it was a woman in Connecticut of all places, and I think her name was Kelo, had a house, and a developer wanted to build a shopping mall there, and he prevailed in the courts. And the story is that Justice Scalia was in the minority, and he said, this will be overturned one day. This is a very bad decision. It'll be overturned one day. Well, they're trying to use Kelo as a precedent. And I think once we have our time in court, that will be overruled, or overturned rather. Between now and then, there's going to be Iowa District Court, Federal District Court, Supreme Court, because no matter the outcome, the person who loses at whatever level is going to appeal it. And there'll be a lot of rich law firms before it's over, and it's probably going to take, well, it'll take many years. I'd be surprised if this were settled in 5 or 6 years. So as far as I know, the people digging the pipelines want to go out and do their surveys, and now the battle sometimes is just whether the surveyors can even enter the land. That's being adjudicated somehow, and then we have just the idea that when can they start digging, and that digging aspect is a long ways off. So I am not pessimistic. Let's put it that way.
I guess we're running up on the end of time here, but I guess you're up for re-election here in November. Is there anything else you want to say to voters in your district to encourage them to go out and vote for you?
I encourage them to go out and vote. And I say that because the turnout in the primary was abysmal. It was embarrassing. I won the primary by a bunch, only because I wasn't opposed. I'm opposed by a Democrat now. I don't I don't campaign well, other than the fact that I am passionate about this country, and the fact that I have served. I took an oath to this country when I was 18, and I never thought it ever expired. Um, and this country has to be made up of people who want to get in the arena, not sit on the sidelines and gripe about whether the coach called the right play or not. And that's why I got involved. Was I couldn't sit on the sidelines and just gripe about something. I had to be part of the solution. So I want them to vote, and before they vote, get educated on who they're voting for or against. Hopefully for, but that's the beauty of this country. We're unique amongst all countries in history in that regard, and we ought to appreciate it, and we appreciate it by exercising our right to vote.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your time today, Mark. This has been a great conversation, and go through some of these issues and what's been going on in Iowa. So thank you.
Okay. You betcha. You take care.
Well, there you have it. Were you offended by this podcast? Good. Thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate you all. Have a great week and stay conservative.